sun was very hot at the building site. Kofi was tired, but he kept working. He needed money for his wife, Nana. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child. Kofi wanted to buy food and medicine for her. He carried bricks up to the 3rd floor of the building. The wooden platform under his feet made a loud sound. It was weak, but Kofi did not stop. He told himself he would be careful. He just wanted to finish his work for the day. Kofi stepped forward. Suddenly, the wood broke. He tried to grab something, but there was nothing. He fell from the 3rd floor to the ground. "Kofi has fallen," shouted one of the workers. "Come quickly." The workers ran to him. Kofi was lying on his back. His body was not moving. One man touched Kofi's chest and shook his head. "He is dead," the man said softly. The workers stood still. Some of them covered their faces with their hands. A young boy at the site began to cry. The news spread quickly through the village. Women came running to the site shouting and crying. Some fell to the ground and rolled in the dirt. The men stood quietly, looking down at the ground. Nobody believed that Kofi was gone. "He was a good man," one of the workers said. "What will happen to Nana now?" "She is pregnant." The elders in the village talked. They decided to send 3 old women to tell Nana. Nobody wanted to tell her the news, but someone had to. The 3 women walked slowly to her house. They whispered prayers as they walked. They knew this news would break her. Nana was sitting outside her house. Her big stomach showed she was close to giving birth. She was sewing small clothes for her baby. She smiled when she saw the 3 women coming. "Good afternoon, my mothers," she said. "Please come and sit." The women did not sit. They stood in silence. Nana stopped sewing. She looked at their faces. "What is wrong?" she asked. Her hands began to shake. The oldest woman, Mama Aba, stepped forward. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tears ran down her face. "What happened?" "Tell me," Nana shouted. Mama Aba looked away. "It is Kofi," she said. "He had an accident at work." Nana's hands flew to her mouth. "Where is he? Is he hurt?" she asked quickly. Mama Aba's voice trembled. "He fell. He did not survive," she said softly. Nana let out a loud scream. She fell to the ground, holding her stomach. Her body started shaking. She could not breathe well. "Help her," one of the women shouted. Some men nearby ran to help. They carried Nana on a wooden bed. They moved quickly to the hospital, which was far. Nana's face was pale. Her eyes were closed. She made small sounds as they walked. At the hospital, the nurse checked Nana. She looked worried. "The baby is in danger," the nurse said. "We must bring it out now." They carried Nana to a small room. She was still not awake. The doctor started the delivery. Outside, the 3 women waited. They could hear Nana crying in pain. They held each other's hands tightly. The cries stopped after some time. Then they heard the weak cry of a baby. The nurse came out. Her face looked sad. "The baby is alive," she said, "but it is very weak. It was born too early. Its body is not formed well." The women went inside. Nana was lying on the bed. Her eyes were open, but she looked at the wall. The nurse placed the baby in her arms, but she did not move. "My husband is coming soon," Nana said softly. She smiled in a strange way. "He will see our baby." The nurse shook her head. "Her mind is not well," the nurse whispered. The shock was too much for her. The baby was very small. Its head was not shaped right. Its legs were bent. Its hands shook when it tried to move. The doctor said it might not live for long. That night, the village was quiet. Nobody lit lamps. Nobody made food. Nobody spoke. They had lost Kofi, and Nana had lost her mind. A damaged baby was born, and nobody knew what would happen next. The days after the baby's birth were full of sorrow. The women who had come with Nana stayed at the hospital, but they didn't know what to do. Nana sat on the bed, staring at the wall. She did not speak to anyone. She did not cry. She held the baby in her arms, but it was as if she didn't see it. The baby was very weak. It hardly made any sound. Its tiny body shivered as it struggled to breathe. The nurse tried to feed the baby, but the baby refused to eat. Its bent legs and misshapen head made the women's hearts heavy with pity. Every time they looked at the baby, they whispered prayers, but they knew the baby might not survive. "Nana needs help," one of the women, Mama Abba, said to the nurse. "She cannot take care of this child. Look at her." The nurse nodded. Her mind is broken. The shock of losing her husband has destroyed her. She does not even know where she is. "What will happen to the baby?" Mama Abba asked. "The poor child is suffering already." The nurse sighed. "I do not know," she said, "but the baby needs care. Without it, the baby will die." The villagers came to the hospital the next day. They stood outside, whispering to each other. They had heard that the baby was alive, but damaged. Many of them were afraid. They said the child was born with bad luck because of the father's death. "Nothing good will come from this baby," an old man said. "It is a child of sorrow." Some women shook their heads and clapped their hands. "This is too much," one of them said. "First, we lose Kofi. Now, we have this tragedy." But there were a few kind voices among them. A young woman stepped forward and said, "The child did not ask for this life. It is not the baby's fault. Someone must help." The crowd murmured, but nobody offered to take the baby or help Nana. They stood there for a while, talking and pointing, but in the end, they left. When the hospital released Nana and the baby, the three women brought them back to the village. Nana walked slowly, her face blank. She held the baby loosely in her arms. The women tried to talk to her, but she did not answer. She just looked at the ground as she walked. The villagers came out of their houses to watch. Some shook their heads. Others whispered to each other. Children stood in groups, pointing at the baby and laughing. "Look at the baby's head," one of the boys shouted. "It looks like a broken pot." Another laughed. The women carrying Nana turned and scolded the children, but the damage was done. The laughter followed them all the way to Nana's small house. When they arrived, the women placed Nana and the baby inside. "What will happen now?" one of the women asked. "I don't know," Mama Abba said. "Nana cannot take care of the baby, but who will help?" Days turned into weeks. Nana's condition did not improve. She hardly spoke. She sometimes laughed to herself, a strange, hollow sound that made the villagers uncomfortable. She left the baby on the mat most of the time, staring at the wall instead of feeding it. The baby grew weaker. Its cries were soft and short, as if it did not have the strength to make noise. The neighbors could hear it, but they did nothing. They believed the baby was cursed. One day, Mama Abba came to check on them. She found the baby lying on the floor, its tiny arms shaking. Its face was pale, and its eyes were barely open. "Nana, the baby is starving," Mama Abba shouted. But Nana only laughed. Mama Abba picked up the baby and rushed to the village square. She called out to the women there. "We cannot leave this child to die," she said. "If nobody helps, this baby will not survive." The women looked at each other. Some muttered excuses. "I already have my own children to feed," one said. "How can I take care of another?" "It is not our problem," another woman said. "This child brings bad luck." Mama Abba was furious. "You all talk about bad luck, but this is an innocent baby. If it dies, the guilt will be on all of us." Her words hung in the air. The women avoided her eyes. Finally, one of them, a younger woman named Efua, stepped forward. "I will help," Efua said, "but only for a little while. I do not have much." Mama Abba handed the baby to Efua. "Thank you," she said softly. "May God bless you." Efua tried her best to care for the baby, but it was not easy. The baby cried often, and its body was so weak that it could barely drink milk. Efua took the baby to her house, but her husband was angry. "Why did you bring that child here?" he asked. "We have our own problems. We cannot take care of someone else's burden." Efua argued with him, but he would not listen. A few days later, Efua returned the baby to Nana's house. She placed the child on the mat and left quietly. The baby's life became a daily struggle. Nana was too broken to care, and the villagers refused to help. The child was often hungry, dirty, and sick. When it cried, Nana would sometimes laugh or leave the house. The neighbors would hear the cries but ignore them. The baby somehow survived, but it was clear that its life would not be easy. Its body was weak, its legs could not straighten, and its head seemed too heavy for its tiny neck. As it grew older, it began to crawl, dragging its bent legs behind it. The children in the village teased it, calling it names and throwing small stones. The child became a figure of pity and mockery. Nobody called it by its name. To them, it was just the cursed baby. The years passed slowly, and the child, now a little girl, continued to suffer. She was small for her age, and her body was bent in ways that made it hard for her to walk. Her legs dragged behind her when she tried to move. Her arms were thin, and her hands shook when she reached for things. She often sat on the ground staring at nothing, her large, sad eyes empty of hope. Her mother, Nana, had become a shadow of herself. She rarely left the house. She spent most of her day sitting in the corner, talking to herself or laughing at nothing. She would sometimes sing softly, as if trying to comfort herself, but her voice was shaky and strange. The little girl would crawl around the house, looking for food. Most days, there was nothing to eat. Nana had stopped caring about food or anything else. The girl learned to eat scraps from the ground or chew on old hard pieces of bread she found. Her stomach often made loud noises from hunger. The villagers had completely turned their backs on them. Nobody visited Nana's house anymore. They called it the cursed house. Children were told to stay away from the place. The few times someone walked by, they would hear the girl crying inside, but nobody stopped to check. One day, the girl crawled out of the house and into the village. She was hungry, and her mother had not moved for 2 days. The girl dragged herself along the dusty road, her legs trailing behind her. Her dress was torn and dirty, and her hair was matted. Flies buzzed around her, but she didn't have the strength to wave them away. When she reached the village square, she sat in the middle of the road. She looked at the people walking by, hoping someone would give her food, but nobody stopped. Some people whispered to each other as they passed. Others turned their faces away. One woman carrying a basket of vegetables stopped for a moment. She looked at the girl with pity. She pulled out a small piece of yam and handed it to her. The girl reached for it with shaky hands and tried to eat it, but her fingers were so weak that the yam fell to the ground. The woman shook her head sadly and walked away. As the girl tried to pick up the yam, some children nearby started to laugh. "Look at her legs," one boy shouted. "They look like broken sticks." "She's crawling like a lizard," another girl said, laughing. The little girl looked at them, tears filling her eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak. "Please, I'm hungry," she whispered. The children laughed louder. One of them threw a small stone at her. It hit her arm, and she flinched but didn't cry out. Another child threw a handful of sand in her direction. "Go back to your cursed house," one of the boys shouted. "You don't belong here." The girl lowered her head and crawled away slowly. She didn't have the strength to fight back. She dragged herself toward the edge of the village, her body shaking with every movement. Her tears mixed with the dust on her face, but she didn't stop crawling. She was used to this pain. When she reached the house, she found her mother still sitting in the same spot. Nana's eyes were wide, and she was muttering to herself. The girl crawled over to her and placed her head on her mother's lap. She wanted comfort, but Nana didn't seem to notice her. She kept talking to herself, her fingers pulling at the edge of her torn dress. "Mama," the girl said softly, "I am hungry." Nana looked down at her. For a moment her face softened. She stroked the girl's hair, but her hand was trembling. "Your father will come soon," she said, smiling strangely. "He will bring food for us." The girl closed her eyes and let the tears fall. She knew her father was never coming back. She had heard people whisper about how he died, but she didn't understand what death meant. All she knew was that her father was gone, and her mother was not the same. The girl's suffering became a normal sight in the village. People saw her crawling on the road or sitting in the dirt, but nobody did anything to help. Some said she was paying for the sins of her parents. Others said she was a bad omen and should be left alone. One day, a group of boys found her sitting under a tree near the river. She was trying to drink water from a small puddle. Her face was covered in mud, and her dress was soaked. "Why are you drinking like a dog?" one of the boys asked, laughing. "Maybe she is a dog," another said. He picked up a stick and poked her with it. The girl looked up at them with tired eyes. "Please, don't hurt me," she said weakly. But the boys didn't stop. They circled around her, kicking dust in her face and shouting insults. One of them grabbed her arm and pulled her, making her fall into the mud. "Leave me alone," she cried, her small voice breaking. "Please." A woman passing by saw what was happening. She shouted at the boys, and they ran away laughing. The woman looked down at the girl, shaking her head. "You should stay in your house," she said. "The streets are not safe for someone like you." The girl didn't answer. She wiped the mud from her face with her small hands and crawled back home, her body aching with every move. That night, as she lay on the cold floor of her house, she looked up at the roof. Holes in the thatch let in small beams of moonlight. She reached out her hand as if to grab the light, but her fingers trembled too much. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "Why am I here?" Her mother sat in the corner, humming a strange tune. The room was silent except for the sound of the girl's breathing and the distant cry of a night bird. The little girl didn't know it, but her suffering was only beginning. The woman's name was Amma. She arrived in the village one hot afternoon, stepping out of a black car with tinted windows. She wore bright red clothes, a shiny necklace, and high heels that clicked loudly as she walked down the dusty road. Her eyes looked sharp, scanning everything, but not with interest. She looked down on the village, as if it was a place she didn't belong. Amma had come back to visit her sick mother, but she wasn't here out of love or care. No, Amma wasn't interested in anyone but herself. She was a woman of the city, known for her cold, calculating ways. She had lived in the city for many years, where she was involved in things that the villagers wouldn't dare to speak of. She had worked with men who trafficked women, dealt with shady businessmen, and used people for her own gain. But now, She had come back to the village, not because of family, but because she saw a new opportunity. Her first day in the village, she made it clear to everyone that she was better than them. She didn't speak to anyone unless she had to, and when she did, her tone was always cold, her words sharp. She paid no attention to the hard lives the villagers led, nor did she care about their struggles. She was here for one reason, and it wasn't for goodwill. The little girl was in the doorway of her house when she saw Amma walking down the path toward her. The girl had not seen such a woman before, someone so fancy and so different from the simple people in the village. She was weak, and her body still hurt from the long days of hunger, but she crawled out into the sun. Maybe she could ask for food. Amma saw her right away. She stopped, her eyes narrowing, as she took in the girl's dirty clothes, her bent legs, and her strange movements. "What do you want?" Amma asked with a sneer, her voice dripping with disdain. The little girl hesitated. She wanted to ask for food, but the words didn't come out right. Her mouth was dry, and she could barely speak. Amma looked at her like she was some kind of animal. "What a sad sight," she said, barely masking her disgust. Pathetic. But then, something changed in her eyes. Instead of turning away like she had done to everyone else, Amma paused. She looked at the girl again, this time with a different look. It wasn't kindness, but it was something. "What's your name?" Amma asked, a little softer now. The girl stared at her, unsure how to answer. She didn't know her name. She had never been called by anything but the cursed one. But Amma wasn't interested in that. She was interested in something else, something the girl didn't understand yet. "Here," Amma said, taking a small piece of bread from her bag and tossing it at the girl. "Eat this, but don't think I'm doing you any favors. I expect something in return." The girl grabbed the bread quickly, her hands shaking. She didn't know what Amma meant, but she didn't care. The bread tasted better than anything she had eaten in a long time. Over the next few weeks, Amma visited the girl often. She would bring small things, bread, old clothes, sometimes even a little money. She didn't give the girl anything for free. Every time, she would make sure the girl knew that she owed her. "Take it," Amma would say, "but don't forget you owe me." The little girl didn't understand much, but she felt a strange pull toward Amma. She had never been treated like this before, even if it felt wrong. She was still so weak, so hungry, and Amma was the only person who gave her anything. Amma began to visit more often, but her kindness was always attached to something else. She would ask the girl to do small tasks. "Go fetch water for me," Amma would say. "Clean the floor." And when the girl did, Amma would give her a little more food or a few coins. But Amma was not just giving out kindness. She was using the girl. She started asking for more, asking her to help with things that the little girl didn't understand. Sometimes, Amma would talk about things the girl couldn't follow. "There's work to be done," she would say. "Big work. You'll help me with it, won't you?" One day, Amma showed up with a big bag. "Come," she ordered. "I need you to carry this for me. You'll go with me to the city. It'll be a long trip, but you'll be paid well. People will see you work hard, and I'll make sure you eat. But you have to do everything I say." The girl didn't know what the city was, but she was too weak to refuse. She only nodded. She had never been out of the village, never seen anything bigger than the small paths between the huts. But now Amma was offering her something else, something she didn't understand but knew she needed. As days passed, Amma's true intentions became clearer. She wasn't there to help the girl. She was there to use her. Amma was involved in dark dealings in the city, things that the villagers didn't know about. She worked with men who were in charge of illegal businesses, men who used women for cruel purposes, and now she wanted to use the little girl as well. Amma had already started making plans. The girl was small, weak, and people would feel sorry for her. They wouldn't question Amma when she asked them to do things for her. The girl could work for her, fetch things, and even be sold to others if it came to that. Amma was a master manipulator. She spoke in soft tones when she wanted to, and she knew exactly how to make people do what she wanted. She could see that the little girl was desperate, and she used that to her advantage. One evening, Amma told the girl, "I'm going to take you with me. I'll make you better. You'll have food, and people will look after you. But you must follow my rules. If you don't, you'll regret it." The little girl nodded, her weak eyes looking up at Amma with hope. She didn't fully understand the woman's words, but the promise of food, warmth, and care felt like the answer to her long, painful struggle. She didn't know what Amma meant by rules or what would happen after, but right now, food sounded like a dream. Amma looked at the girl, her eyes cold but calculating. She wasn't going to care for the girl out of kindness. No, this was something much darker, but the girl couldn't see it. Amma grabbed the girl's arm firmly, pulling her up with little concern for how weak the girl was. The girl staggered, trying to keep up, but her feet dragged. Amma didn't stop, didn't slow down. She was focused only on her plan. The girl's hunger, her need for comfort, was her tool now. They left the small house, walking through the village, the girl's thin body trembling from both fear and hunger. The streets looked different in the fading light, too big, too unfamiliar. But the girl didn't care. She just wanted to eat. She just wanted to sleep without the pain in her stomach. The journey to the city was hard. The girl's legs were weak from malnutrition, and she could barely walk at Amma's pace. But Amma didn't care about her exhaustion. She would drag the girl along if she had to. When they finally reached the city, the girl looked around, her eyes wide with confusion. The buildings were huge, the lights too bright, the people walking quickly, not paying attention to her. Amma stopped in front of a tall building, its walls made of glass. She turned to the girl, her face unreadable. "You're going inside," Amma said coldly. "Don't make me repeat myself." The girl looked up at Amma, her head spinning with everything she didn't understand. But she followed. Amma led her into the building through a set of large doors. Inside was cold, and the girl's body shivered as Amma pulled her further inside. They entered a small room. The girl looked around, confused. It smelled strange here, clean but cold. She didn't know what to do, where to go. Amma pushed her toward a chair and told her to sit down. "Stay here," Amma said. "I'll make sure you have food soon, but you have to be patient." The girl nodded, her mind too foggy to question anything. She just wanted to eat. She just wanted to sleep without hurting. Amma left the room, and the girl sat, staring at the walls, her stomach growling louder than the silence in the room. She didn't know how much time passed before Amma came back, but when she did, she brought food, rice and stew. The girl's heart leaped. She took the food eagerly, barely tasting it, just feeling the warmth fill her empty body. But Amma's smile was different this time. It was sharp, calculating. She watched the girl eat, but her mind was elsewhere, thinking about what she would gain. The girl was nothing more than a tool, a way to make money, a way to get what she needed. The girl finished the food quickly, feeling the warmth settle in her stomach. For the first time in a long while, She wasn't hungry, but she was tired. So tired, she could barely keep her eyes open. Amma watched her, silent. Then, in a voice low and cold, she said, "You'll sleep here tonight. But remember, you must do what I say. If you don't, you'll regret it." The girl didn't understand the threat. She only nodded, her body too weak to protest. She just wanted to sleep. That night, as the girl lay on the cold floor of the small room, her body aching, she thought she heard voices outside, but she was too tired to listen, too tired to care. The promise of food had made her forget about everything else. The pain, the fear. Amma had given her food. Amma had promised to take care of her. But in the quiet of the room, something didn't feel right. There was a coldness in the air, a feeling that made the girl shiver, even though she was full. The door creaked open. A man stepped inside. The girl looked up, her eyes heavy with sleep. But she didn't know who he was. She didn't know why he was here. Amma's voice came from the doorway. "She's ready. She'll do whatever you ask." The girl didn't understand. She just closed her eyes, too tired to care, too hungry for more food, too weak to see the danger.